He was one of the richest men in America. He built a private world of more than 100 rooms so that his family would never have to leave his side. It didn't work. Today, that ballroom is silent. The windows are broken, and the family that built it all is gone. Peter Widener didn't start rich. He started as the son of a butcher, learning the trade in his father's shop in Philadelphia. Then the Civil War broke out, and Widener saw an opportunity most men his age never would. He won a contract to supply meat to Union troops. It made him his first real money. He didn't spend it, he invested it in something almost nobody else believed in yet: streetcars. He didn't just buy a few lines, he bought Philadelphia's entire streetcar system. Then he did the same thing in Pittsburgh, in Chicago, in New York. People started calling him the Traction King, but Widener didn't stop there. He helped found US Steel, American Tobacco, a shipping company that would one day own the most famous ocean liner in history. Along the way, he entered politics too. For years, he controlled the city's finances as Philadelphia's treasurer. Money, power, and influence, all flowing through the same hands. By the 1890s, he was one of the wealthiest men alive. But then, something happened that no fortune could fix. It wasn't the first tragedy the family had faced. Years earlier, one of his own sons had died as a young boy, taken by illness before he ever grew up. Widener had buried a child once already. His wife, Hannah, died suddenly aboard the family's yacht. Widener was shattered. He couldn't stand to live in the house they had shared. So he made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He would build something enormous, a house big enough for his sons, their wives, their children, and every painting he'd ever loved, all under one roof, all close enough that he would never feel that kind of loss again. He hired a young architect nobody had heard of yet, a man named Horace Trumbauer. Together, they looked to the great country estates of England for inspiration, and set out to build something America had never quite seen before. It took only 2 years to build, and it cost a fortune so large it's almost impossible to translate into today's money. They called it Lynnewood Hall. On one December night, carriages lined up outside the gates. Hundreds of guests walked through the doors for the very first time. An orchestra played. Chandeliers lit up hallways lined with paintings most museums could only dream of owning. Widener didn't just collect art, he obsessed over it. He was known to pay far more than a painting was worth, just to make sure it belonged to him and no one else. Every gallery inside the house was designed around the paintings themselves. Even the light was engineered. Soft, diffused, filtering down from above, just to protect the canvases from the sun. More than 100 servants kept the estate running. It had its own farm, its own power plant, its own bakery, even its own indoor swimming pool. Lynnewood Hall didn't need the outside world. It was its own miniature kingdom. Royalty walked through those halls. Painters like Henri Matisse, dancers like Anna Pavlova, princes and princesses from across Europe. Every autumn, Widener even opened his galleries to the public, letting ordinary visitors walk through halls only presidents and royalty usually saw. For a few weeks each year, his private kingdom belonged to everyone. One guest in particular would return years later, under very different circumstances. His name was Captain Edward Smith. For now, though, life inside Lynnewood Hall felt untouchable. Widener's sons lived in their own wings, with their own families. Grandchildren ran through galleries filled with masterpieces. To anyone looking in from outside, nothing could ever reach this family. But somewhere out at sea, something was about to change everything. Peter Widener's son George, his wife Eleanor and their son Harry were finishing a trip through Europe, buying art, buying books, living the kind of life Lynnewood Hall had been built to celebrate. For their journey home, they booked passage on the most talked-about ship ever built. Before it even left port, George hosted a private dinner on board. His guest of honour was the ship's captain, the very same man who had once been welcomed into the Widener family's home. That night, the captain left the party early. Reports of ice were coming in. Nobody at that table could have known it was the last dinner some of them would ever share. Hours later, the RMS Titanic struck an iceberg. George Widener did not survive. Neither did his son, Harry. Only Eleanor made it into a lifeboat. The grandson's name had been Harry, the very same name Widener had once given to the son he lost decades before. Peter Widener was in his 70s when the news reached him. He never fully recovered. His health simply gave out over the following years, as if grief had finally succeeded where age never could. He died inside the very house he had built to keep his family close forever. His surviving son, Joseph, inherited everything: the fortune, the art collection, Lynnewood Hall itself. He held on as long as he could. He kept the galleries open. He kept the parties going. He even built one of the most respected horse racing empires in the country, presiding over some of America's most famous tracks. But even as he did, the world outside those gates began to change. Because the truth was, the age of private palaces was already ending, and the next generation was growing up in a very different America. None of them had grown up the way Peter Widener had. They'd inherited comfort, not hunger, and comfort rarely fights to keep anything alive. Near the end of his life, Joseph made a decision that said everything about where things were heading. He gave away the family's art collection, the very paintings his father had once refused to live without, donating them to a museum where the public could finally see them for free. When Joseph Widener died in that same house, he took with him any real chance that Lynnewood Hall would stay in the family. His children didn't want the burden of it. Within a year, the doors that had once welcomed royalty were opened instead to auctioneers. First, the land was sold off. The racetracks, the gardens, carved up into ordinary housing developments. Then, a radio preacher bought the mansion itself, hoping to turn it into a religious school. For a while, it actually worked. His sermons reached thousands of listeners every single day, and for years the money kept coming in. But eventually, even that began to unravel. Regulators shut his broadcast down, and with it, one of the mansion's last real sources of income. Piece by piece, the house began to disappear from the inside out. Marble fireplaces, sold. Wood paneling, sold. Even the estate's grand fountain, gone. Decades later, one final owner tried to bring the building back to life, hoping to use it as a church. He fought for it in court, again and again, all the way to the highest levels of the American legal system. He lost every single time. The man fighting for the mansion wasn't even a preacher himself. He was a surgeon, commuting in from New York, trying to save a building the courts refused to let him use. The gates stayed locked, windows broke, and were never replaced. For years, Lynnewood Hall sat like this, visible from the road, but invisible to almost everyone who passed it. When explorers finally got inside, they found things no one had touched in half a century. A hidden room full of locked safes built into the walls, missing from every blueprint, a tunnel running beneath the entire property, leading somewhere nobody could quite explain. Behind a broken mirror, someone even found handwriting from over a century earlier, left by the very workers who had built the house in the first place. The mansion by then had lost most of its original land too. What was once hundreds of acres of gardens and racetracks had shrunk down to just a small fraction of its former size. The house that once held 100 servants now held nothing but silence. But that wasn't the end of the story. A small group of people who had never met a single Widener decided they weren't ready to let the house disappear. One of them had been obsessed with old photographs of the mansion since he was 11 years old. For years they fought for it, and they finally did what no one else had managed to do in over 70 years. They bought Lynnewood Hall. The damage waiting for them was enormous. Decades of water, decay, and neglect. Bringing the mansion back would take tens of millions of dollars, money they didn't have yet but were determined to raise. Slowly, a small community of supporters began to grow around the effort. People donating, people visiting, people simply refusing to let the story end in silence. Even descendants of the family started paying attention again. One of Peter Widener's own portraits, painted by a world-famous artist generations earlier, was sold at auction, and part of that sale went straight back into saving the house he once built. Not long after, it became official. Lynnewood Hall was added to the National Register of Historic Places. A mansion once considered too far gone to matter had just been guaranteed a permanent place in American history. Not far away, another mansion just as grand once stood beside it. It didn't survive. Lynnewood Hall is now one of the very last of its kind still standing at all. Peter Widener built Lynnewood Hall so that his family would never have to leave each other. Instead, the house outlived almost everyone who ever loved it. For 70 years it stood empty, not because the walls gave up, but because the people did. Maybe that's the real story of Lynnewood Hall. Not that one of the richest men in America built the last American Versailles, but that it took a stranger, a kid who once saw an old photograph online, to remember it was ever there at all. Call to action. Every abandoned place has a story waiting to be uncovered. Which one should we explore next? Leave your suggestion in the comments. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Ruined Tolux for more forgotten places and incredible true stories. I'll see you in the next forgotten story.